and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. In this week's program we look at an important documentary that crossed a minefield to get to air. But first, radio. From the first broadcast of Parliament in 1936 to coverage of the Christchurch earthquakes, radio has provided rapid and mostly reliable information to New Zealanders. Jose Barbosa asked one of radio's longest-serving producers to walk us through the journey.
Hello, this year marks the centennial of radio in New Zealand, and we're better to discuss this than the Wellington headquarters of Radio New Zealand. And who better to be our guide than Jack Perkins, who is the producer of the long-running documentary series Spectrum. He's also worked in the medium for 51 years. Jack, thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
So Jack, when radio first came to New Zealand, was it universally welcomed?
Not universally, no. The people loved it. They embraced it straight away, but officialdom was very aware that control, this was this brand new medium that went everywhere. If it got in the wrong hands, you could have demagogues and public unrest and great political upheavals kind of thing. So they brought in some legislation in 1923 which banned controversy on radio,
right.
Can you believe? And it effectively meant that we didn't have a news service, independent news service, for the first 40 years of radio. And just to give you some idea of the kind of paranoia that was around in those days, here's a guy, John Stanage, talking about trying to get a radio receiving, not transmitting, receiving licence.
I don't think it's generally known that in the early 1920s you were required to actually draw a circuit diagram of the receiver you propose to use and have it certified by a solicitor or justice of the peace, and also to swear on the Bible that you wouldn't disclose any secret messages which you might hear.
That's amazing. And when was that? When was that recorded?
Oh, that'd be just about 1923, 24.
Right.
You know, just indeed that very early period.
Okay, so private radio really got started in the 60s. What impact did that have on the industry?
Well, it shook it up. It brought in quite different standards that have been used to on public radio. More confrontational, more abrasive. And there was one guy in Auckland who, even by today's standards, you know, was quite something. That's Tim Bickerstaff. And he also introduced sports talkback. Well, you'll see what I mean.
If it was rugby, look at all this sports.
Ask me this, are you a sponger?
I'm not a sponger.
Would you pay your own way?
Of course I would.
Well, what the hell are you talking about?
Because I've gone out and I've sold raffle tickets because I've been one wife and about 15.
Yeah, well, why don't they do the same? Why don't they go out and sell raffle tickets to raise a lousy $9 for a game of soccer once a week? Now, I think that's fair enough. Like, you don't, basically because you are stupid.
Are you married?
You are. Get the hell out of it. Hello?
What in your mind has been the greatest technical innovation in radio of the last 100 years?
Well, I don't know about the greatest, but I'm going to pick on one that really did change the sound of radio, particularly public radio, and it's something I've had a lot to do with myself, and that's the advent of the portable tape recorder. Now, what it did, it allowed producers to leave the studio. It freed radio from the studio, that rather aseptic, controlling kind of place, and it allowed them to go out into the real world and record things as they were happening, record Kiwi stories in the vernacular. So it was a totally different sounding radio.
Can you see what I can see? Right across the other side of the lagoon, there's a bloody duck swimming around.
Yeah, I can see it.
You see?
Yeah.
I'll wait until he gets a bit close to the decoys, and then I'll stand up, and that'll put him up.
Hey!
Oh, you bastard, look at that.
Hey!
I couldn't hit a bloody barn if I was inside it.
It was the real world, it was the audio world. You know, as it happened, you get little natural pieces of drama that you never get in any other way.
I know this is a bit of a tall order, but I was wondering if you could encapsulate the last 100 years of Radio New Zealand. How would you go about doing that?
Well, I think it's been very much a small country with mountainous terrain, and people have gone out and put radio stations all over the place, and it's been a huge factor in bringing people together in New Zealand. You know, conquering distance, this vertical isolation that we had. I think probably that's been one of the main things that radio's done.
Well, that was then, this is now. For years, our public radio broadcasters' news shows have both set the news agenda and set it in context. But does Radio New Zealand still do that? And with its budget frozen for at least the next 2 years, can it do that? I'm joined now by RNZ's Head of News, Don Rood. Welcome, Don. Well, let's cut to the chase. The money. How's the budget freeze impacting on your news operation?
It's funny you should ask that. It is impacting. Working under tight financial constraint is not new to Radio New Zealand. We've been under a budget freeze for 3 years, and it's just a matter of making getting the biggest bang that is possible out of every buck. What we're trying to do is reduce things behind the front line. The front line is sacrosanct. We've got to preserve that, but it is having an impact.
Define front line for me.
Front line, well, the news gathering is for us, and I'm speaking as head of news. There are other parts of Radio New Zealand that are equally important as a public service broadcaster, but in news we've got to be able to continue putting out that product, and I don't like using the word product, but that is what we put out every day, 3 hours of solid news and current affairs on Morning Report, more throughout the day, and that pays off for us, but it is expensive.
So where has the squeeze gone on? What are we not seeing that we might otherwise have seen?
Well, we've had to close one regional office. We've had to put our expansion plans for other regional offices on hold. We've had to, we've got a sinking lid on some staffing positions. We don't have some correspondent positions, which we place great value on.
So that's been a strength of your news operation over the past decade, is having those dedicated correspondents.
And they're very good at it too. And I mean, I've had it described to me as one of the best jobs in New Zealand journalism, because here you're able to concentrate just on one subject, become an absolute expert, know it inside out. And people like John Gerritsen and Karen Brown, they're doing a superb job in actually getting those stories out and telling them to New Zealand. And also taking part in that debate, which I think is quite important for as a public service broadcaster.
Does that make it harder for Radio New Zealand to play that role of being the agenda setter?
Well, it does. As I say, it does make it more difficult. It is a matter of getting the biggest bang for your buck. So yes, we want to continue setting the agenda, and there's a great satisfaction in that as a head of news, that knowing that you have set the agenda and other people are chasing you. And looking every morning at the Herald or Stuff sites or other internet sites, quoting Radio New Zealand, told Radio New Zealand says, there is a satisfaction in that.
On the other hand, though, there are people are saying that since the departure of Sean Plunkett, that Morning Report has lost some of that edge, that it needs the hard-nosed interviewer. What's the feedback you're getting on that?
Well, yes, I mean, people love what they've got. And Sean, on his best days, was a very, very good journalist and a very, very good interviewer. I think what we're doing now is also filling that need. And the audience figures that we've got recently, have just come out, Morning Report is the most popular breakfast show in the country. There is no music station or talk station that can touch it. It is the most popular station.
And yet the perception is that it's for an elite. It's for a pointy-headed, lefty liberal elite. That is the perception, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of what cobblers talked about the Radio New Zealand. I mean, the perception is, or there are claims around that we don't do surveys, or if we do surveys, we don't publish the information. They've been up on the website for years and regularly updated. And as I say, the latest results are absolutely superb. We couldn't ask for better. A 12% increase.
That must have been as a consequence of the earthquake coverage, which was very good.
Yeah, the figures I'm talking about are from April 2010 to April 2011. If we just took the Christchurch earthquake figures, they'd be far, far better. But over a year, in 4 different surveys, the average comes out that we've had a 12% growth for Morning Report's audience. And that's very good in the market at the moment.
Indeed. I think one problem for Morning Report, certainly recently in the past year, is that you are not getting the cabinet ministers. There are some notable exceptions. Jerry Brownlee turns up, Stephen Joyce does, Anne Tolley doesn't. The Prime Minister, he's a hard get. Why is that happening?
Well, there are some ministers, as you say, that do turn up. I mean, Jerry Brownlee is a man that is under a lot of pressure. He's got an extraordinarily difficult job. His own house has been ruined by the earthquake, but he turns up and he puts the case. Bill English is another good one, Stephen Joyce. They all regularly turn up on Morning Report or Checkpoint and are prepared to be interviewed. There's no fuss.
So what are you saying to the ones who don't turn up?
Well, coming back to that point that I made earlier about it's important that we take part in a debate, that New Zealanders can listen to a debate about the issues that are important to them or that they don't know whether are important to them. And they need perhaps reassurance, they need to hear both sides of a debate, and it is frustrating when you can't get someone on and we have a policy where we'll say, well, so-and-so did not turn up. You know, we invited them, didn't turn up.
Are you tempted to get more hard-nosed, do the radio equivalent of the empty seat, really make an issue of it?
Well, I think that makes a point. When you're talking about our audience, there is, coming back to your point about being lefty liberal, the actual Nielsen did a survey a while ago that actually showed proportionally more National Party listeners listen than Labour Party listeners, which is, I think, a reassurance. Whether you want to be preaching to the converted, depending which party you're on, I don't know. But I think there is a perception that Radio New Zealand doesn't matter. I would argue that with 500,000 listeners, you're alienating a large part of a very educated and discerning public.
Just finally, assuming that the budget freeze only does last another 2 years, what do you think is under threat? Will it possibly be travel budgets? Are we going to see less foreign coverage?
Well, our foreign travel budget is very limited, and so we have to pick what we can do. Australian stories such as the bushfires or the Australian elections, which I think have an impact on New Zealanders. Pacific stories, and that's about where it ends. It doesn't take many trips to burn off the travel budget. This year we've been under, well, the financial year just ended. No one could have picked 2 earthquakes and a mining disaster, and that has really, really stretched our budget, well, stretched it beyond what it was. So we have to take those hits and move on and hopefully be able to do it in the coming financial year.
Would you care to mark yourself out of 10 for this year?
On some areas, I would say on the Christchurch earthquakes, I think we've done a superb job, absolutely superb, and we've had lots of people come out, whether it's people in Bexley, thank God you're here, and all due respect, they didn't have TV out there, they just had radios, and through to cabinet ministers privately or civil defence, really appreciate what has been done. So on that, I would say 9. You can always do better.
Indeed. Best of luck for the future. Thank you, Don Rood. After the break, a rotten shame.